Welcome to the inaugural Coloradan Conversations. Before we begin, I would like to mention that this event is being closed captioned. To access captions, please click the CC button located at the bottom toolbar of your Zoom window. This series was built in partnership with CU Boulder's community, CU Boulder's Chancellor DeStefano, the Alumni Association, and the Coloradan magazine to bring Coloradan stories to life throughout the community, conversation, and engagement. This series promises to stir intellectual curiosity and will begin to build the foundation for action without the commitment of taking a class. We are glad you're joining us this evening as we unpack the complexity of racism in our communities and explore ways to move forward. My name is Albus Brooks. I am a proud CU buff. I graduated in 2001 with a degree in religious studies and now serve as vice president of Millender White. For over 8 years, I served as a member of Denver City Council and as the city council president. What I'm most proud of is playing football for the Colorado Buffaloes in 1997 to 2001, when we were the Big 12 champs. Go Buffs. Come on, baby. Over the next year, I will serve as your host throughout the Coloradan Conversations series as we highlight and break down important topics such as racism, climate change, and leadership. We know these topics are being discussed among friends and families. The goal of the series is deepen your engagement with the university and its thought leaderships while offering tangible next steps you can take. Tonight, I'm thrilled to be here moderating this panel on anti-racism with two incredible practitioners in the field of diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice. We'll get started by sharing a short video to set the tone and context for the conversation. In the video, you will hear CU buffs reflect on how their experiences have impacted the ways they move and show up in the world. Let's check it out.
I'm a Black student. I'm fighting to get paid for my labor, fighting to be seen and heard, fighting to learn in a safe space for my mind and body, fighting to graduate and be alive.
CU Boulder was a blessing and a curse.
Attending CU Boulder was a culture shock. It was the first time in my life that I was the only Black student in a classroom. It was the first time I felt all eyes were on me everywhere I went.
Since I was a little girl, people have often told me that I was different from what some folks consider to be the typical Black girl and Black woman. I was smart. I was an exception.
Aren't you tired of hearing the same song for generations, sitting on repeat?
Black students, faculty, and staff do not feel safe, are not safe at CU because of systemic and institutional racism and because of individual biases and prejudices. This is wrong. We can change it.
In quarantine, I've realized, in addition to a COVID-19 virus vaccine, we desperately need a vaccine for the virus of racism, COVID-19.
CU Boulder and others who receive public funding must take steps to ensure they are providing equitable opportunities. Communities must hold organizations accountable.
What can you do about it? Pandemic or not, get uncomfortable.
Dismantling oppression is not a goalpost. It is a vision for the future.
Real change will not exist on this campus until BIPOC students are able to breathe, survive, and thrive at CU without this fight.
In order to combat racism, each of us must have faith, purpose, someone to love, and something to look forward to.
Engage in dialogues with colleagues or family members around the current state of our democracy. Sign petitions, make some calls, and send emails. Contribute to bail funds. Educate yourself.
My life, all Black lives, are worthy, as they always have been. This is a movement, not just a moment, and I will not stop advocating until justice is achieved for all Black lives.
I love that video. Joining me this evening are two advocates who are dedicating their lives to moving forward diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice. Their work in tonight's conversation is focused on solutions of substance and longevity to have direct and positive impact in the community. Theodosia Cook. Theodosia Cook is the inaugural Chief Diversity Officer for the University of Colorado. For campus system. In this role, she is working to develop and implement statewide policies and initiatives that promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. Before working in higher education, Theodosia resided in the K through 12 space as a professional and development, lead teacher, curriculum writer for culturally relevant teaching, and a union representative. Theodosia holds a BA in political science from Sewanee, the University of the South, and an MA in education and leadership from the Teachers College, Columbia University. Welcome, Theodosia. We're excited to have you today.
Thank you, Albus. I'm excited to be here.
We also have Benilda Samuels. In March of 2020, Benny joined the Rose Community Foundation as a vice president of programs from Rose Community Foundation's mission. It's to advance inclusivity, engage in equitable communities in the greater Denver area through the values-driven philanthropy. Her career also includes senior roles at Nurse Family Partnership, Denver Health, Hospital and Authority, Denver Department of Human Services, Mile High United Way. Benny's life work has been dedicated to improving services, access, and a voice for the underserved and marginalized populations. In 2020, Benny was named one of Colorado's top 25 powerful women by the Colorado's Women's Chamber of Commerce. Benny is a proud Afro-Latina, born and raised in Panama. She holds an MA degree in mass communications from the University of Colorado Boulder and an undergraduate degree from the University of Denver. Welcome, Benny. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So great to have you both here. I'm going, Benny, Theodosia, and I are going to acknowledge the past and have a conversation about a pathway forward. As our audience, you will have the opportunity to participate in this dialogue. So we ask that you use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen to submit questions to us at any point throughout the program. Before we dive into the conversations, we want to hear from you, our audience, to get a sense of who's joining us today. Please submit your answer to the following questions when you see it come up on your screen. So here's the question. Are you satisfied with the anti-racism work that is happening at the University of Colorado Boulder? Let's see the results as they come in. They're coming. Make sure you're filling it out. 75 no. Say that again. I think we heard something. 75% say no. Wow. Well, I'm glad that we are here having this important conversation. It is important that we start the conversation by defining racism. In his book, How to Be an Racist, Ibram Kendi defines racism as a marriage of racist policies and racist ideas that produce and normalizes racial inequities. He then goes on to define racial inequity as when two or more racial groups are not standing on approximately equal footing, and says that racist policies are any measure of that produce or sustain racial inequity between racial groups. So, with this in context in mind, let's move to some questions for our panelists today. So I have a question for both of you all as we get started. What are your experiences? You guys have such a depth of knowledge and you have been everywhere. What are your experiences with racism? We'll start with you, Benny.
Oh, sure. Thank you. And it's good to be here with all y'all. Over the years, there have been lots of experiences, many what I think of as microaggressions that, build up over time. I know that I was a young aspiring graduate student at CU, met with a professor who was considering my my acceptance, and I'll never forget that professor said to me, he looked me in the eye and he said to me, "You're not graduate school material." And so I just thought, wow, he doesn't know me from anywhere. He doesn't know me at all. And so I also had another experience at some point in another, school, but actually outside of the United States, where a professor really just looked at me and said, I know you didn't write this paper, so you need to redo it. And I'm like, I wonder, where does that come from?
Wow.
What, without any kind of explanation behind that, right? As a Black mother, I have a 22-year-old, and I live with the fear that most Black mothers live with, right? Like my son has been stopped, and that was not it was a decent interaction, but not a right interaction, right? And by decent, I mean he came home, he was alive, and that's quite honestly what's really important to me. But the interaction was not something that we should be proud of in any way. So
thank you for sharing that. Theodosia, first of all, we see your child come in, and we want to let you know this is a child. We welcome that beautiful baby.
Working mama.
Yeah, come on, I love it. So let's turn the question to you. Where have you experienced it?
Since we're talking about this in the framework of higher education, I'll speak to my time at my undergraduate, where at the time I was doing work in the area to really support many different groups. One group was grandparents raising grandchildren, which was predominantly a white group of lower socioeconomic white grandparents taking care of their white grandchildren, because in the area at the time there was a high meth rate use that impacted those children and their parents having the opportunity to take care of them. At the same time, there were very few minorities, Black and Indigenous and Latinx people, BIPOC people, and Asian people around. And in the school systems, there were nooses being hung in kids' lockers, and I was speaking up about it. There was also a raid on a factory close by of Latinx people, and they were deported, but the owners of the factory were never reprimanded for hiring undocumented people, right? So all these things were occurring, and as a student activist, very active in highlighting it, as well as highlighting the issues in my class. And at the time, the leader of the KKK, because they still exist, lived about 20 minutes from my institution. And there were some people on my campus as well as off my campus that were not happy about the work that I was calling out in terms of what was happening in the community and what we needed to do to support all those different types of groups. And an entire website was created to really demonize myself and some other colleagues of mine. And the Department of Justice got involved. I remember they came out to me at the school, had a conversation with me, like, your life is in danger. need you to relax on this. And I'm like, as an immigrant, as a Black person, as a person who's grown up poor, these three issues are very close to me, and I'm not stopping. I'm going to keep speaking about it. And so I had to ensure that there was security for me to walk home and get home safely. So these things have been happening in our nation for quite some time. Racism is alive. The reality that someone can threaten my life and threaten the lives of others at the institution because of the work we were doing in the community to call out the bigotry, to call out the xenophobia, to call out the lack of resources for those who were dealing with drug abuse and not being provided the type of care that they needed to support their families was problematic. And so, you know, I think when I think about racism, I think about how do we care about our people as Americans, right? We say that the Statue of Liberty is supposed to be a symbol of us opening our doors, our waters, our country to others who are different from us. Remembering that the first people here were the Native Americans, the indigenous people. And so there were white Western Europeans who doors weren't necessarily opened, but were able to make this space theirs. And so how are we as Americans making the space here in America available and caring for others like us and different from us?
Yeah.
Wow, powerful.
Yeah.
You know, we got a ton of questions, but I'm looking at both of you all. And I'm just so proud. I'm so proud, first of all, that CU Boulder and see in the conversations that we're having here, they're highlighting excellent Black women, number one, right? I want to just honor that moment, number one. And two, I want to go straight to my mother she got her PhD from UCLA. She is my hero, shero. She was the first African-American born in Lake Village, Arkansas. She was placed in a box so she wouldn't contaminate the rest of the white babies. She then grew up to become this incredible woman who still today at 74 years old is in Denver, you know, fighting for racial equality in education. I want to ask you all, what kind of barriers as Black women have you personally had to fight through to get to this established, these women that we see before us today, these powerful, intellectually sharp, leading organizations, breaking down systems? What have you had to fight through? Benny, we'll go with you.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's been a journey for sure, right? And one that has at least taught me a great deal about resilience and a great deal about speaking my truth, whether it hurts me or not. And I live by that. You know, professionally, you know, I've had people who've been mentors and who've, you know, helped me, you know, move forward. But I've also had a lot of detractors, right? People who didn't think I was capable, people who didn't think I was worth, you know, the pay, all of those things. But, you know, I think that for me, it's been very important to be very clear about who I am. Right? The good, the bad, the extraordinary, and all that it is, right? And so embracing all of who I am has always allowed me to walk into any room with a great sense of authenticity. And I do think that authenticity brings about trust. And so, you know, it is what it is. And you know, I say it like it is. And so, you know, I prefer that any day than writing something nasty about people in a bathroom, right? And I actually think that there are a lot of people in this country who respect that, right? I mean, you may not like what I have to say, but I'm able to say it to you directly. And so for me, it's been a long journey, but it's been one where I have made it a point to stay authentic to who I am and to not mince words and to be direct and to be graceful.
That's excellent. Authenticity, right? I love that. Theodosia?
Yeah. Oh man, being an authentic Black woman anywhere is so difficult. So, You know, I can speak, I'll speak about my challenges, but I'll speak about it through the challenges that researchers have really found out recently in the last decade about Black women within especially the DEI space, right, doing this work. Black women who do this work suffer from high blood pressure, not because we don't eat healthy, because we have the resources to go to Sprouts and Whole Foods and get all the good, organic, great food, and we cook really well. But that's not the problem. The problem is the stressors that are placed upon us that create this body biological reaction of increasing our high blood pressure due to the stresses, right? So that's one thing that I've had to deal with that also has impacted the maternal health that I've also had to encounter being a mother. And as we know, within healthcare, social determinants of health, they're starting to realize racism is the issue, not necessarily because I'm Black, but because of the racism that we have to endure, especially when you're choosing to be a part of this work, it hits you even more, right? So we have preeclampsia being overly within this developing country, harming Black women and maternal health care and the impact that that has. So I had preeclampsia with my first child. She was born 2 pounds, 10 ounces, and I had to figure out how to live while she was in an incubator, also trying to live herself, right? So doing this work has impacted my health. And then the reality as Black women doing this work, we get these negative terminologies placed upon us, like being intimidated for speaking our mind, for being highly competent and not being expected to be competent, for asking questions and challenging the status quo, because in doing DEI work, what we are doing is not just challenging racism, we are challenging power and systems of power. And people who are in power do not like to be challenged. But in essence, that is the embodiment of being a diversity, equity, and inclusion professional, right? It's asking those tough questions, it's digging deeper into data, it's asking people to prove why they think what they think and why they're taking the actions they're taking. And so those negative stereotypes are placed upon us, although the research shows that when men, especially white men, perform the same attributes, the same characteristics, those negative terminologies are not placed upon them. So as you can imagine, that impacts our ability to really show up in the workplace and be liked, to have friends, right, as colleagues, because people assume that you are just this particular type of person when you are actually doing your job. And it also impacts the ability for us to be seen as true leaders beyond just the DEI space, because I would argue that DEI leaders are like strategy consultants of McKinsey, Bain, and BCG. We must be highly competent in strategy, in analysis, and we should be able to take on any project, whether the project is around pay equity, whether it's around how our procurement offices work with women-owned businesses or minority-owned businesses and RFPs, whether it's in thinking about healthcare and social determinants of health. Whatever the topic is, we must show up highly competent to use our strategy and our analysis to provide an answer in terms of, are we being equitable within this space?
Wow. Amen. And yes, all of that is true. You know what I thought is interesting is we did see your daughter, and I want, because you shared that story, please tell us your daughter's name.
Her name is Mackenzie, and it means child of wise leaders, and just strength, which is intentional. And her middle name is Isabella, and it means God's gift, like Theodosia.
Beautiful. I love it. Thank you for sharing that. You know, Theodosia, I want you to answer this question because you're in this work. You are over the 4 campuses of CU Boulder. And what does it mean to disrupt these systems? You know, and specifically what, you know, what strategies are you using to disrupt systems that Benny and I had been in as students?
Yeah. So to disrupt systems, right? Systems are built with policies. Policies are enforced by people, right? And so it means really taking a look at what policies we have currently here at CU, from regent policies that really govern the policies on the campuses to the policies on the campus and how those are implemented and then therefore impact people, right? You know, sometimes when we're doing this work on the ground, we don't understand that there's this legal landscape or this particular policy that's making people make the decisions they make, and we're not fully aware of it. Sometimes those policies haven't been updated in 30 plus years. So there needs to be a look at them, right? Because the laws have changed. Cases have been produced that have shown a different precedence versus what they were 30 years ago. There's also the reality of, you know, how then, who are the enforcers? Do we have enough people on the ground to ensure that Title VII, Title IX, ADA, 504, et cetera, are being implemented in the ways that they need to, so that way that these different forms of discrimination in a legal lens aren't being impacted. So I'm really looking into our policies. I'm looking at those who are enforcing them, like HR, deans when it comes to faculty policies, when we think about, you know, CU's going through a whole pay equity review right now. And so thinking about that. And then when you consider our curricular choices, right? That's working with faculty to understand how we're making these choices, how we're embedding our research. So working with our Vice President of Academic Affairs, as he truly is the one leading that work at the system level. So beyond policies, it's also thinking about how do we bring in new strategic programmatic shifts, right? So if we're thinking about hiring, what is the best way to go about hiring in an equitable way? Oregon University has an amazing search advocate program that's renowned within higher education. And so their program looks at how do we train people to sit on search committees and to oversee searches to ensure that they're fair and equitable and they're abiding by fair hiring practices. It's a program that I used at Dartmouth College while I was leading DEI work there. And what we saw within the first 2 fiscal years is that over 50% of our faculty recruits for open lines were BIPOC faculty, because the way we looked at hiring had shifted, not necessarily tokenizing people of color, that was not the intent, but to ensure that we were actually using criteria to evaluate people, both quantitative and qualitative measures. We were very clear about our job description and aligning that job description to the evaluation, right? So when we think about our students saying, I don't see enough faculty of color, or I don't see people who look like me on campus, right? We have to ask ourselves, what are we doing within hiring to really not allow that to be the reflection that we have here at CU, and what can we do to ensure that we are being very fair and clear about our hiring practices. So that's one thing. Another thing that we're doing out of my office is also thinking about mentoring in the academy, right? Mentoring for undergraduate students, for graduate students, for faculty that are tenure track and non-tenure track, right? And so we know that a lot of people have ideas about mentoring, but the National Academies came out with a report in 2019 around what mentoring in the academy should look like and the roadblocks that have been encountered over the several last decades within the academy. And they highlighted a program called SIMMER, the Center of Improvement of Mentored Experiences and Research out of UW-Madison, led by Dr. Profund, I have now our faculty affairs professionals, our DEI professionals, and our Center for Teaching and Learning professionals. We recently met with Dr. Profund to understand how we can bring that program here to CU to all 4 campuses to ensure that we have a evidence-based mentoring program to support all of our academic related constituents in getting them through and understanding their program. And what's really important about that mentoring program is it tackles these cultural issues. It's not just about, you know, what are you reading and how are you networking, but it's about how am I mentoring a woman? How am I thinking about mentoring a person of color or someone from a low socioeconomic background? What is the social capital that is needed? Because we know within the academy, a lot of this rides off of social capital, right? So how are we providing that in an equitable way for people to be able to access these grants, to be able to connect and understand how peer reviewing works, and to be able to have people support them in growing their careers.
Really good. That's really good. And switching to Benny, Theodosia was talking about higher ed, right? And the systems there, but Benny, you are known in the community, right? And what does disruption look like in the community? You can use Rosen as an example, or throughout the community at large. I want to know what disruption really looks like of the system in our communities.
Yeah. Well, I do think that in philanthropy, which is where I am now, in working in service of community, I think that understanding is a really important one for philanthropy, that our role is in service of community. And when we start being accountable to community, to the changes that we are creating, then I think things are going to start shaking out, right? I mean, I think an important part of philanthropy that is being disrupted where we can, and that we certainly need to do more of, is that idea. I mean, philanthropy is all about wealth, and wealth in the United States is all about power. So it's all about sharing that power, right? And understanding that we've always thought about wealth as the way you get power, and that wealth is held by certain people, right, of certain skin color. So the idea is now to think about, actually, wealth is more than just money, right? Like, I can bring something to the table that you cannot bring. And you may be able to bring money and I can't bring money, but hey, right? I mean, we're now trying to share power, because the value that we bring is the same, regardless of whether we can write a check or not. And so we're working a lot on that, working a lot on listening, right? On listening to community deeply, and not listening to react and not listening to respond, but just listening to learn. And so for me, this disruption takes courage. And when I say it takes courage, I'm fully aware that it doesn't mean that you're not afraid of stepping in it or saying the wrong thing or whatever, but you do it anyway, right? If you're really in it for change, you put on your armor and you do what you need to do. And you do a reflection about your own self, right? Like you really figure out a full scan. You look inward, what have I been taught? Who's in my circle, right? Yeah. And have I consciously or unconsciously chosen my circle? And why did I do that? I mean, who do my kids play with at the playground? Right? Like all of those things we have full control over. Control over. Yeah. So when they don't resemble the communities that we live in, there's an intention for it not to, right? And so I just want to say it really does take a courageous soul to sort of disrupt. And I know that philanthropy, is really working on doing this in a different way. I mean, money is a really crazy thing in this country, right? Yeah. And it's the number one thing that gives us, aside from the color of our skin, that gives us power. And philanthropy just has to learn to share that power.
Yep. You said something that I think is powerful, and a lot of folks don't think about when they talk about disruption, and it's service to others.
Yeah.
And when you come in service, that means coming below, right? It doesn't mean coming in from the top. It doesn't mean coming in with preconceived ideas. It means coming in with empathy and humility and service to what you don't know. And I think that's the issue, is that in this conversation, there's so many people who know. They know what the issue on race is, even though they even haven't been in the conversation. And so thank you for sharing that. There are a lot of folks who are watching today who are predominantly Anglo, right? And who are in this conversation because they want to be an ally. And so I want both of you guys to answer this, and we're getting short on time. And so, have these directed comments. I wish I could do this, y'all. I'm telling you right now, I could do this for 3 hours, but we don't have that time. How can you become an ally or advocate in a world or sphere of influence, right? So we really need to, folks are really wanting to know the tools of how can I help? I want to be in this, right? How can you do it? Theodosia.
Oh, I was hoping you would start with Benny first. Well, I think there are several different ways. One, educate yourself, which means don't rely on Benny and I or people who look like us to educate you. Google's a wonderful tool. If you still have access to CU Boulder's library resources, use it. The researchers have published so many wonderful things that can enlighten you. The second thing, like Benny said, philanthropy. If you have the resources, use it. Philanthropy really means love of mankind, right? So how are you loving other people? And how are you using trust-based philanthropy? And I encourage you to Google trust-based philanthropy, which is what Benny was speaking on in terms of listening to people and giving them what they need versus what you think they need. So use your resources to fund organizations, to fund projects that people on the ground are saying they need. The third thing is don't be afraid to get in it and mess up and own you messed up and sit in that humility of messing up, right? We as leaders mess up and like Albus said and Benny shared, like this is work where you need to be humble. You need not to take the attitude of well, I'm here, so shouldn't you like that I'm here? 1619 and prior to that, slavery existed in this country. And then you think about with here on the West in terms of the land being taken from Mexico or this, the war that happened, the Mexican-American War, and people in terms of, I hear a lot of Latinx people here in Colorado say I'm 13th generation, which means they were here before that this land was called the United States of America. So recognizing the history of the land that you're on, empathizing with the stories and acknowledging that you don't have all the answers. What you can do, though, is listen to the people on the ground and really ensure that their voices, their work, their needs are being elevated over yours.
Perfect. Benny, we're running short in time, but I want to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I show your vulnerability, get comfortable with saying, I don't know, read. I agree with that. And if you're sitting in a position of privilege at those tables where decisions are being made, be the anti-racist voice, right? Demand, use your influence and your power to change things up, right? You may have to take one for the cause, but that's okay, right? Like you will see a change happen if you're using your influence and you're using your power to just create change, to mix it up, to support, the cause. So I would say it's just very important to. I think the other thing that's very important is proximity, right? Like if you don't have that, you need to get that in an authentic way, right? Like don't go out and get a whole bunch of, people of color that are your friends or that you hang out with. I mean, in an authentic way, because proximity, is what lets our heart and our empathy that you talked about, right? Come about, right? Like when somebody else's, we all have children and we all love our children. And if you love that child that's being harassed by a police officer and that child's a part of your life, it hurts you, right? I mean, get proximity, get close to people who are struggling so that you can find that empathy and you can understand their plight from a different perspective.
Thank you, guys. I want to just highlight and underline one thing that you both kind of said, Theodosia, you actually underlined it, was the people that you see here on your screen are not your voices, right? For racism and anti-racism conversations. Go do your homework, go do your work, and be the voice in your own context. That's the most powerful thing you can do, right? And so, all right, before we transition in, we're about to hear some questions, but before we do that, we got a couple poll questions. So we want to get the temperature and see where you guys are. So it's almost over. We have a couple questions here. Let's scroll up and see what these questions are. Okay. First one, have you personally witnessed or experienced racism? And the second one is, have you professionally witnessed or experienced racism, personally and professionally? We'll see. Look at the poll. It's coming up. Come on, y'all. You put your little answers in. It's a yes or no. All right. Wow. So, yes, we have 92% that say personally, yes, they have experienced racism, and 76%, I believe that is, yes, 76% that says professionally they have experienced racism. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. We're going to go we're going to hear from you. This is the questions from the audience, and I'm going to read them, and we'll see which of our panelists wants to take on the first one here. Okay. Joshua says, I think the biggest thing is trying to successfully treat the trauma caused by racism. What are the ways forward to support students who have had this trauma? Theodosia, I think this is directed at you.
We need more racially trauma-informed psychologists and psychiatrists. And there are not enough in this country. I'll just be very frank with you. And then when they do exist, I can tell you the wait to get on their roster is very long. And so this is a systemic issue, right? In terms of ensuring that we educate and create that pipeline. So here at CU, there's a need, and I know that we have in some of our campuses increased that mental health support, but there needs to be more, and there needs to be an actual intentional outreach to hiring and recruiting and going after those who are racially trauma informed in that area. You know, Dr. Chester Pierce was a Black man, head of the American Psychological Association, Harvard graduate, Massachusetts General Hospital psychologist. I encourage you all to look up his work. He speaks very frankly on microaggressions. He was the Black man that coined the term. It started out with his research in the early 70s after integration, in terms of he was seeing Black men were increasing in their anxiety and their mental health was decreasing, and he was wondering why. And what he realized is racism was having this impact. And he coined the term microaggressions to talk about these small, subtle, subvert, bigotry-like statements made to impact and harm the mental health of Black people, specifically Black men. And so if we had more people to build upon Dr. Chester Pierce's work, more psychologists trained and versed in it, I think we could do a lot of good work. Personally, I've been working with the National Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Center out of Vermont in supporting them with really embedding racism into PTSD. And so that's a personal commitment of my own work, but it's something that we need more mental health professionals informed in that way to support our students.
Yeah, and I want folks to hear what trauma does. I mean, this is racism caused trauma. Cortisone releases from your brain and into your body when you have trauma. This is a health crisis in our communities. And I appreciate you sharing a lot of that before. Okay, we have, I want to get to, there are a ton of questions up here. Which one do we have? Let's see. Okay. Olivia says, how do we inspire and engage young people in this work, in this fight for change? Benny.
Well, I mean, I do think that in our community, at least here in Colorado, we have some great community-based organizations that are working with youth to learn how to advocate, to learn how to speak up, to learn how to use their voice. And you know, many of them may be in the resource that you will get after this call, but I would encourage us to not only support those organizations that are mostly led by people of color, that are really sort of supporting and teaching our youth to be the next generation of voices. And actually, you know, as we have seen in inaugurations and other things, we don't even need to wait for them for the next generation, right? Like some of them have arrived and are already making an impact. But I do believe that on a community level, there are quite a few organizations that really do this beautifully and well, and really are training and developing the next generation of advocates and activists.
Yeah, Benny, I want to underscore that. You know, I'm I work in a company of development and construction. I'll tell you, this new generation isn't putting up with any kind of companies that do not have DEI policies, work frameworks in place and are doing something about it. I'm hearing a lot of these young people come show me what you have planned as a company. And I think there's something in this. I mean, this is a generation that went through COVID, went through all of these issues and had a chance to reflect and say, we want to see the transformation. And so I think it's deep within them. Let's see. We have another question here from Jennifer. How can someone who lives in a place that doesn't feel diverse expand their circle? Theodosia, you want to take that on?
Sure. So I want to first say that diverse simply means the presence of difference. And in order for us to really understand difference and embrace difference, we have to see the differences in ourselves, which means I always encourage white people to first look at the white people around you. How are you all different from each other? Let's not just say diverse is synonymous with race. It is not. It simply means the presence of difference. So you need to first recognize, how are you different from this white people that you are around? Just like I look at the Black people that I'm around and identify how I'm different. So I can first value difference, period. And then I can begin to grapple with difference in race, difference in sexuality, difference in gender, difference in other areas that may be not as physically present around me. But I would first encourage you to look at and recognize. I sat in rooms with all white male executives, and I told them, if you can't recognize the differences that exist here, you will and value it, you will never value the difference that I bring to the table as well, right? Because you'll just see me as the diverse person, when we need to recognize that white people, diversity exists there as well.
Love that. And I think there's an addiction in people to live in silos, right? And so your encouragement to get us out and to recognize differences, so powerful, so powerful. All right. Velveta asked the questions, what responsibilities, if any, do BIPOC members of university governance boards have when at a predominantly white university? Who wants to take that on?
Well, I mean, I'll let Theodosia respond to that because it's very specific. But I will say that boardrooms of big nonprofits, corporations, foundations are not that different, right? And also have the same kind of responsibility, right? Because again, I'll say they are too working in service of community. So it's not just about like making sure that the table is different and there are differences around the table, but it's also there should be thought differences, there should be experiences that are differences, and only those boards can really truly serve their community effectively and efficiently.
Yes.
So
yes, that's powerful.
So I want to say that those BIPOC individuals serving on the governance board or even in leadership have the responsibility to do their job and to serve on that board first and foremost, right? BIPOC people are not synonymous with DEI professionals. Not every person that's a person of color is a person that's a professional in this work. And I think we need to recognize that and not place that responsibility on them. I think it's the responsibility of all members on a governance board to ensure that they're serving the body that they're serving in an equitable way, that they're in tune to what that body needs, and that they're meeting the needs of their constituents. And that's the responsibility of every single person on that board. Yeah. I think far too many times we tokenize BIPOC people who sit on boards or who are in leadership positions to do DEI work. I'm the Chief Diversity Officer. That is my actual professional responsibility. I'm not doing it because I'm a person of color. And if there is a person of color who is leading finance or who is leading administration or who is leading academic affairs, their job is to do finance, their job is to do administration, their job is to do academic affairs. It is not to do DEI. And I think we far too many times think that anyone can do DEI work, and it minimizes and devalues the professionalism that it takes, the experience, the research, that it requires for someone to sit here being competent in that space. So let's not minimize competency for tokenization.
I love it. I love that. Say that again, put an amen on it, run the tape back. Okay, we got some more questions. Rebecca, what is your take on white guilt? Benny.
It's not helpful. That's my take. If that's all it is, if that's where it starts and ends, that's not helpful. That's not helpful to the movement. That's not helpful to the cause. That's not helpful to the journey. So you know, guilt is one thing that can make us look inward, which I've been talking about. And so that's important to do, but you can't let it stop there, right? It is simply, I mean, that's what I'm going to say. It is simply not helpful to just feel guilty. You need to move past that, and you need to get support to move past that into action, because that's the only way that it's going to be helpful.
Theodosia, anything you want to add to that?
Completely agree. There are different psychologists who've written about the different stages of identity, the different stages of white guilt, and how to move through it. I encourage you to Google it, research it. But white guilt usually occurs after the realization of, oh my gosh, this has happened. So I want to say congratulations. You realize something has occurred that is harmful, and now you're sitting in that guilt. Sit in it, but don't stay too long in it. You need to move forward and recognize, how do you get out of that guilt? Because the guilt makes you just center yourself, and it's not about you. There's a lot of people who have been harmed, a lot of generations who've been harmed, right? I tell people slavery is not that far removed. My husband's family is from Mississippi. And when we go back to Mississippi, we walk on the land that his, great uncles have been lynched on, the land that his father grew up sharecropping. His parents went to segregated schools. This is not a distant past, right? My mother, who's an immigrant as well, like myself, said, oh my gosh, she called me the other day and she said, oh my goodness, do you know there was segregation in the 60s? I was a child. I was like, yeah, you were alive and there was segregation in this country in the 60s. That is not far, this is not removed. So while you're sitting in that white guilt thinking, oh my gosh, remember I'm sitting looking at my husband's father thinking about the sharecropping land he grew up on and what that means. And he's not sitting in that guilt. So you got to get up, go, and keep moving to actually do something to fix the problems of this nation.
To add on to this, guilt does not lead to transformation. It does not lead to it. So do not, like my sister said, don't sit there. Okay. Sharithio, did I say that right? Sharithio, I'm sorry if I did not say it right. You have a beautiful name. Don't hold it on the account of me saying it poorly. The average person will take a long time to realize that race is a social construct. What can we do in the short term?
I would say, yes, it's a social construct, but it has impacted the world. It has impacted colonization. It has impacted slavery. And so as much as we understand it to be a social construct, sometimes when people bring that up, and I don't know if this is the intent, so I don't want to make that assumption here, we are minimizing at times the harm that racism and race categories has had on this nation, as well as throughout the world. When the reality is we have to understand, in order to dismantle that social construct, we have to understand how it's been used to harm the entire world. Benny talks about being from Panama. I'm originally from Guyana, South America. The majority of Black slaves were dropped off in South America. Were dropped off. So when I think about the Latin world, we have a lot of grappling to do as Latinx individuals with how we treat Afro-Latinas and Afro-Latinos and Afro-Latinx people. Because the reality is, if you look at the statistics there, Black people and Indigenous people in Latin America are still being dehumanized. And when you go to our countries, the boxes aren't Latinx. They're white, they're Black, they're Indigenous. Those are those boxes that we check. It's only when we come to this nation do you all then group us together and then say we're one group. When you don't recognize the impact that slavery has had, the impact that war, that taken away of Indigenous people's lands have had throughout the continent, and Central America and the Caribbean and Latin America as a whole. So we can't just say race is a social construct and leave it there. We have to say race is a social construct that is harmed and left a stain on this world. And what are we going to do to fix it?
Yeah. I'm gonna jump in. I want you guys to have the eyes of Moses, just this prophetic vision of what you want to see. What do you want to see in this space? What would be transformative in this space as we think about this anti-racist space in the context of America, right? In the context of Colorado, in the context of CU and Rose Community Foundation in Denver. What do you want to see? Vinny?
Well, I was listening to John Powell yesterday on a webinar, and he said something that really, really struck me. One is, I want to see us understand belonging and leave othering way behind us, right? The idea of belonging as human beings, even if we're different, even with those differences, carrying those differences, but this idea of belonging. The other thing that I think about a lot is I want to make sure that we, in this fight for racial justice, that we don't do repeat what the dominant culture has been doing, which is to separate and to divide and to, I'm just gonna deal with my people and I'm just gonna, right? Like that, like I sure hope that we don't find ourselves down that road, and that we, and that we find a way to bring belonging into the equation, more than anything.
Theodosia, we're running out of time, but I want to hear this from you.
I'll try to be concise, Albus, but I want to see us do what Germany did for the Jews.
Yeah.
I want to see us reconcile with the harm that we have caused Indigenous people and Black people here in this nation. I want to see us actually start our history with Indigenous genocide and with African slavery. I want us to own it. I want us to stop beating around the bush. I want us to be honest about it, because now we're saying, oh, we gotta make sure we have, diverse perspectives. Yeah, but then there's the truth and there's history, and we need to teach that, and we need to own it. The Holocaust, 9 years plus the years that we aren't aware of, right? Because those are the things we aren't really taught. But slavery happened for over 400 years on top of the years of segregation, right? And so what are we doing there? As an educator in this country teaching 8th grade English, I had an entire term dedicated to teaching the Holocaust. Nowhere in that curriculum for not just 8th grade, but from K through 12, was there an entire term dedicated to teaching Indigenous genocide or African-American slavery. And that happened on this land, in this nation. And so when we get real about that, I believe that we are being honest about reconciling the harm that has happened on our land, because we have a long way to go. And I'm hoping that we can all work to get there.
That's going to put an exclamation on all of this. And I want to say, for folks who want more resources on what Theodosia was just talking about, read Cast by Wilkerson. It is phenomenal. Look at it. See, I knew she had it in the back. As I think about this time, I'm highly impacted. I played football, went to school at CU, and I was cheered on Saturdays and demeaned every other day of the week. I wish in my 4 years I was able to partake in a conversation about this. The trauma that I endured as a football player, people pushed off because I was performing on the field. But for years upon years, I was struggling inside as a Black man on Boulder's campus because I wasn't seen. And I just hope that someone on campus is seeing this and is getting encouraged by this and is actually getting some tools to get help, get support. And I hope that others are seeing how they can be anti-racist workers in this space. We need you. We need your support. I hate that we have to wrap up this time, but I want to respect your time. And I got folks in the back like, bro, I mean, this is good, but we got to roll. So thank you. I want to thank you to CU Boulder for having this conversation. Thank you to Theodosia and Benny. You are fabulous. And I honor you as incredible Black women in this space. Thank you so much. And even though tonight's discussion is over, there are many ways for you to keep it going and to engage with the University of Colorado's diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice efforts. If you want to find some more information, you can continue to support anti-racism you visit CU colorado.edu/Coloradan/conversations. Again, that's colorado.edu/Coloradan/conversations. We have more information, and there's about 3 things that you can do. 1, how do you learn more? For example, CU is offering free anti-racism course. It's available to the entire CU Boulder community. You can do that. 2, you can volunteer with one of the many anti-racist organizations. 3, you can give your money. You can donate to a cause that speaks to your hearts, that motivates you. All of this information will be sent in a follow-up email to all of you who have logged on and registered tonight. Finally, be sure to join the May Coloradan Conversations when we will discuss climate change. Have an excellent evening tonight, and thank you so much.